what are some of the priorities for the United States going into the General Assembly next week?
Well, it's good to see you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the priorities of the United States as we go to the opening of the United Nations General Assembly. We will be working hard on behalf of the American people. We will be focusing on peace and security issues, again, issues that are absolutely vital to American security. In particular, we'll be looking at some of the efforts to control nuclear terrorism, and the Secretary General of the United Nations will hold a meeting in this area. We'll also be working on human rights and the rule of law, and there'll also be a high-level event looking at the rule of law, a crucial concept for democratic governance. We will continue our deep commitment to working on sustainable development, particularly important as we look ahead toward to the work on the Millennium Development Goals. And in order to make the system work well, we'll be continuing our diligent work on UN reform efforts and on helping the United Nations manage the budget in a responsible way.
Assistant Secretary Brimmer, obviously the situation in Syria is taking up a lot of people's time. It's in a terrible humanitarian crisis. It's a terrible situation. The United Nations is playing a role in a number of different fronts in this crisis. Could you talk a little bit about how the United States sees the United Nations playing a role going forward as the Syria crisis unfolds?
Indeed. Unfortunately, the crisis in Syria is one of the most serious on the international agenda. There has been a horrific loss of life, which we've all seen on our television screens, and we've been deeply moved by the tragedy we've seen around us. And as you know, the United States thought we should try to bring all of the international tools to try to help the Syrian people in their quest for a better society and a better life. Unfortunately, the efforts of the Security Council were halted by vetoes by the Russian Federation and China. Nevertheless, the international community has made clear through the General Assembly, not once, but twice, that we're committed to try to help the Syrian people. And we see continued efforts to try to help the nonviolent opposition, to help express the views of the Syrian people. And we think it's important to help the efforts at a political transition. We strongly support the role of Ambassador Brahimi working on behalf of the United Nations. And we think it's important to continue to provide humanitarian assistance. There have been numerous refugees and displaced people. Generous countries in the neighborhood have taken in refugees, and the United States continues to be a major supporter of humanitarian assistance, providing over $100 million in assistance to the Syrian people.
Let's talk about development is also another area where President Obama has spoken in each of his speeches at the General Assembly over in the last 3 years. We have the Millennium Development Goals, which were started in the year 2000. The current set of Millennium Development Goals ends in 2015. There's now a process that's beginning now to look at the next set or the next version of MDG goals, or MDG 2.0, if you will. Could you talk a little bit about what the expectations are of the United States as they enter participation in the negotiations for the next set of Millennium Development Goals?
Indeed, as you've indicated, the Millennium Development Goals have been a very important global process in concentrating efforts of both donors and recipients alike on improving human well-being. And the President, very early on in 2009, committed the United States to the Millennium Development Goals as America's goals. And indeed, this has helped us think about many of the key development issues. We remain deeply committed to completing the Millennium Development Goals, where work still needs to be done between now and 2015. Although there's been significant progress, there's still work to be done. But we're also actively involved in the process, looking ahead to what should be the next stage of the Millennium Development Goals. What will be the right ways to continue to deepen human well-being? There'll be a high-level group which is chaired by the Secretary General, and there'll be many countries involved. We're delighted that an American will be serving on that, John Podesta, on behalf of the United States. And there'll be a series of working groups coming out of the Rio Plus 20 process, also looking at Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, and how best to advance the well-being of people and the planet on which we live.
Any chance that we'll have a goal on governance or democracy?
Well, as you know, we think that governance issues are extremely important. The Obama administration has, of course, supported the Open Government Partnership and continues its work on governance, and thinks there'll be several ways to try to follow up on the commitments to have more just and more democratic societies.
Assistant Secretary Brimmer, what a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for your service.
Thank you very much.